A quiet night over Ivanovo, Russia. Aeroflot Flight 2808 is just minutes away from landing. 77 passengers and 7 crew members are on board, expecting a routine arrival, but the descent is far from being routine. What caused this accident? While the experienced pilots allow a fatal mistake to unfold? And could it have been prevented? This is the untold story of Aeroflot Flight 2808. Aeroflot Flight 2808 was a scheduled domestic passenger flight in Russia that tragically ended in disaster on August 27, 1992. The flight originated from Mineralnye Vody, a city in the southwestern part of Russia, and was destined for Ivanovo, a city northeast of Moscow. The journey included a scheduled stopover in Donetsk, Ukraine. The aircraft assigned for this flight was a Tupolev Tu-154B-2, a twin-engine jet widely used in Soviet and post-Soviet aviation for short to medium-haul flights. The aircraft carried a total of 84 people, 7 crew members and 77 passengers. Among the passengers were 21 children. Aeroflot, the national airline of Russia and former Soviet Union, was operating Flight 2808 as a regularly scheduled domestic service. At the time of the accident, Aeroflot was undergoing significant organizational changes following the collapse of the Soviet Union, with numerous regional branches assuming control over routes previously managed by the centralized Soviet aviation system. The Tupolev Tu-154 used for the flight was a narrow-body, twin-engine jet that had been a mainstay of Soviet and Russian aviation since its introduction in the 60s. It was commonly used for regional and domestic flights and had a generally solid safety record, though it lacked some modern avionics found in Western-built aircraft of the time. The flight's first segment, from Mineralnye Vody to Donetsk, proceeded without incident. After a routine layover, the aircraft departed Donetsk at 9:03 p.m. Moscow time for its second and final segment to Ivanovo. The expected duration of this flight segment was approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes. The aircraft climbed to a cruising altitude of 33,100 feet and proceeded normally toward Ivanovo. There were no reports of technical malfunctions, weather issues or other abnormalities during the cruise phase. At 27 minutes past 10, as the aircraft approached Ivanovo, the descent phase began in preparation for landing. The crew initially descended to 20,000 feet on a bearing of 60 degrees, approximately 62 miles from the airport and 25 miles from the designated turn point for final approach. After this initial descent, the aircraft maintained level flight for approximately 2 minutes at a speed of 270 miles per hour. As the aircraft passed over Dobrinskaya, a designated navigation checkpoint, it was 47 miles from the airport. The flight crew established communication with air traffic control, which instructed them to descend to 5,900 feet and align on 292 degrees bearing for the landing approach. At 39 minutes and 20 seconds past 10, the flight crew reported that they were at an altitude of 5,900 feet and 17 miles from the airport. However, the flight data analysis later revealed that the aircraft was actually at 6,600 feet at the time, indicating either an error in communication or an unrecognized deviation from the assigned altitude. The aircraft maintained level flight for 25 seconds, while its speed decreased from 360 miles per hour to 326 miles per hour. At 39 minutes past 10 p.m., while still in 16 miles from the airport, ATC instructed the crew to descend further to 4,900 feet and transferred communication to the tower controller for final approach clearance. The crew reported that they had reached 4,900 feet, but in reality they continued level flight for another 25 seconds. As the aircraft prepared to enter the landing phase, it was already 1.6 miles to the right of the correct approach path. Despite this significant deviation, the crew requested permission to enter landing mode. At 10:40 p.m., the aircraft passed through the transition level at an altitude of 3,900 feet with a radial distance of 11 miles from the airport. During the final approach phase, the aircraft continued to deviate laterally from the correct flight path. At a distance of 1.9 miles from the aerodrome, it was still traveling at 280 miles per hour, significantly above the ideal landing speed. Crucially, the landing gear had not been yet deployed, and the navigator had failed to set the altimeter to the correct barometric pressure, further increasing the risk of miscalculations in altitude readings. At an altitude of 890 feet, the co-pilot attempted to correct the aircraft's left bank by adjusting the horizontal stabilizer. However, the section was performed improperly and destabilized the aircraft further. At 2.8 miles from the runway, the aircraft's lateral deviation fluctuated between 660 to 980 feet and its altitude was 660 feet. To compensate for the misalignment, the captain initiated a right turn, increasing the roll angle to 35 degrees. This maneuver was performed in an uncoordinated manner, causing the aircraft's descent rate to accelerate dangerously, reaching up to 16 meters per second. The aircraft passed over an undirectional beacon at 560 feet instead of the required 690 feet and was already 130 feet to the left of the ideal glide path. The navigator issued another warning to the captain about the misalignment, but once again the warning was ignored. At approximately 330 feet altitude, the captain attempted to level the aircraft, but did not sufficiently reduce the vertical speed. Despite urgent requests from the navigator to abort the landing and initiate a go-around, the captain chose to continue the descent. At 1.8 miles from the runway, the aircraft clipped tree foliage, veering further off course. Seconds later, it crashed into the ground 1,380 feet beyond the initial tree strike. Several buildings and vehicles were severely damaged, but no ground casualties were reported, while all 84 people on board were killed. Following the tragic crash of Aeroflot Flight 2808, a comprehensive investigation was launched by Russian aviation authorities to determine the exact causes of the accident. One of the first aspects analyzed in the investigation was the mechanical condition of Tupolev Tu-154 aircraft. Given the nature of the crash, there was initial speculation that a technical failure such as an engine malfunction, structural failure or avionics issue might have contributed to the loss of control. However, a detailed inspection of the wreckage and analysis of flight recorder data revealed no mechanical defects or pre-existing technical issues with the aircraft. The investigation confirmed that all systems, including the engines, control surfaces and landing gear, were fully functional at the time of the crash. There was no evidence of structural failure, fire or explosion prior to impact. The aircraft remained intact throughout the flight until it made contact with trees and subsequently crashed into the ground. The primary cause of the accident was determined to be the captain's decision to continue the approach and landing despite being in unsuitable parameters. From the early stages of descent, the aircraft exhibited clear deviations from the optimal approach path, both in terms of lateral positioning and altitude. The flight crew was aware of these deviations, but failed to take appropriate corrective action in a timely manner. In addition to pilot errors, the investigation highlighted serious deficiencies in air traffic control procedures at Ivanovo Airport. The ATC personnel on duty that night failed to follow proper aviation safety protocols and did not intervene, despite recognizing that the aircraft was off course and descending incorrectly. The crash of Aeroflot Flight 2808 was ultimately the result of a combination of human errors, poor decision-making and procedural violations. While the aircraft itself was mechanically sound, the improper handling of the approach, the lack of crew coordination and the absence of intervention by air traffic control led to the tragic outcome.